Thank you all for being here. We'll try to follow up that last panel with some ideas and some solutions for navigating regulated industries. My name is Lisa Shallett. I am very proud to be on the board of Performline. And one of the first things that I did when I retired from my 20 years at Goldman Sachs, most recently as head of brand marketing and digital strategy during the financial crisis, was join the board of Performline. And one of the reasons is because I'm a bit of an oddity. Before having my brand role, was the chief operating officer of global compliance, legal, and audit at Goldman. So bringing those two disciplines together in one person is usually not found. And so I call myself a living perform match. In any case, it is amazing to have this panel here today, and I'm very honored to be the moderator. This is a dream team of content experts who work with brands and are very familiar with regulated industries. And I think that one of the things that's important here, and we're going to hopefully come up with more possibilities than perils as it relates to content marketing, is that often in the roles that you have, it's kind of lonely. You're trying to figure out how to drink from a fire hose and navigate through increasingly complex and innovative things. It's great to have a cross-industry group here, and today's panel will focus on best practices, some greater context so that you all don't feel as alone in the change that you're forging, some trends, and some actionable takeaways. So without further ado, let me introduce in order Brett Lofgren, the Chief Revenue Officer at Contently, Tom DeScipio, the Chief Strategy Officer at Impact Branding, Alicianne Rand, the VP of Direct Marketing at NewsCred, and Matt Crenshaw, the VP of Marketing at Outbrain. And maybe each of you will start with you, Brett. You can spend a minute or a minute and a half talking about what you do.
Sure. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Contently. A little bit about Contently. We are a technology company that works with brands to create original content at scale. We do that through our tech, our vetted network of 70,000 global freelancers, and our proven methodology. We were built and founded by journalists, and that's reflected in our products and services. In my role as the Chief Revenue Officer, I work with customers on both sides of the business, the hundreds of brands that we work with to become publishers, as well as the thousands and thousands of freelancers globally that are journalists and editors and infographic artists. So that's a little bit about me.
Great.
My name is Tom DeScipio. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Impact Branding and Design. And we've been an inbound agency using the HubSpot software for just over 6 years now. We're working with B2B companies, typically small to mid-size, in the software, consulting, healthcare spaces. And my day-to-day, I manage the revenue at the company, so all new business. And I also manage a couple clients of my own. Performline happens to be one of them, so I'm absolutely honored to be here and speaking about them. So typically, I work with a strategy team as well to oversee strategy for each of the clients, and also strategy for the business direction as well for Impact.
Hi, my name is Alicianne. So I run the marketing at NewsCred. For those of you guys who are not familiar with NewsCred, we're the leading content marketing platform. We work with about 200 global enterprise brands ranging from Pfizer to Johnson & Johnson, Bloomberg, AXA, Visa, so many who face strict and heavy regulatory and compliance issues every single day. And we really focus on 3 core pain points. The first is creating content at scale. We know that that's really, really difficult to do, particularly to meet your audiences in a relevant and timely way. The second is creating content in a way that mitigates against risk, so protecting your brand across markets, across channels, across different audiences. And then thirdly, connecting content to revenue, so making sure that your content is actually driving business outcomes, driving traffic, page views, conversions, leads, and sales. My role is interesting twofold. One, I help to run strategies for a lot of our Fortune 500 clients, so building content strategies for them from the ground up. And then secondly, I've also built NewsCred's own marketing and content strategy practice. I was the 5th employee at the company. And so I've learned a lot, made lots of mistakes, and have had some successes as well, building our own content marketing.
Excellent. Hi, I'm Matt Crenshaw. I run global product marketing at Outbrain. So you have probably seen Outbrain even if you don't know our name. We work with the world's leading publishers to have those related stories at the bottom of the page that you see, including the sponsored stories where we place brand stories, content marketing that brands are bringing into our network. We distribute it in front of the right users across publishers like CNN, ESPN, Time Inc. We operate all over the world. We have 20 different offices, very focused on taking all of this great content that brands are creating and figuring out how to put it in front of the right person at the right time. So I run product marketing, which for us is listening to the market feedback about our products, validating what the market needs are, working with our product team to build those products, and then pushing those products out to the market. So I work both on the publisher and the marketer side. And before joining Outbrain, I was at Discovery Channel running digital marketing for 7 years.
So I think we have a very interesting representation of the value chain of everything from content creation to content distribution. I'm going to direct some specific questions to specific panelists, but for now, let's start with one, kind of as a level set that all of you can answer, if you don't mind going in a row again. In this ever-evolving world of content marketing, what are the 2 or 3 most popular formats that you work in, and what's the most recent trend that you're seeing? You want to start, Brett?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of large financial institutions, insurance companies, and healthcare providers. So they're telling complex stories. Primarily, these stories are focused on long-form content in the output of research papers, thought leadership pieces. But really the challenge there is how does this content get transferred into multiple formats? How do you, utilize this, a large piece, and divide it up so it could support all of your outputs, which really is the concept of divisible content. And we're seeing brands like Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan Chase and BlackRock do a really good job of that. And again, they're coming from complex processes with compliance and regulation. So in order to really create that story, you need to start with a large format and break it down.
Okay.
Sure, I would actually support that as well. With many of our clients, we're working with that long-form content, starting with those premium offers, long-form blog posts, really rich content from that perspective, and breaking it down and separating it out over several campaigns. I guess I could speak to the other part of the question, too, and some of the trends that we're seeing as well. I think Gary Vee said this at Inbound 2011 or 2012, HubSpot's Inbound conference, where he said, marketers ruin everything. I could totally relate to that. And the trend that I'm talking about is Facebook, right? Everyone was garnering for likes. Everyone has to get a like on Facebook back in the day. They were trying to make it a B2B platform. And I think it kind of sauntered off, but now we're seeing a huge resurgence of B2B content on Facebook. Yeah. I think people are starting to realize that 1 billion people that you can target really effectively actually is working quite well, and the ad platform has become so much better and so much more interactive. Yeah. So I think that's been a huge resurgence and a huge trend that I've seen. The other trend that I've seen is real-time content. And what I mean by that is these messenger apps that are coming out like Slack, where companies are installing them on their personal servers or whatever, but they're opening them up to the community. So you're actually seeing real-time content from people who are so hyper-focused and targeted on one thing, sharing all their ideas in real time, and people are interacting with it. And that's been a huge trend that I think we're going to be seeing in the very near future.
Cool. So a few trends that we're seeing. I think the first is around licensed content. A lot of B2B institutions are leveraging this. So licensing content from publishers like Bloomberg or Forbes or the New York Times and hosting that on your own properties or using it across any of your marketing channels. Marketers saying that enables them to really increase the speed and the cadence of their publishing. And then also to leverage the credibility and thought leadership of publishers that your audience already knows, loves, and trusts. Another trend that we're seeing is long-form content. And I'm not just talking like long-form blog posts, like 800 words. I'm talking about really, really heavy, research-backed, data-driven posts, 3,000 words or longer. Some great institutions that do this. First Round Capital, they're relatively small in the VC space, but they do a fantastic job of leveraging this. Some of our other clients as well, really leveraging very, very heavy pieces of content. And then third is video content. A lot of our clients, I'll give you one, BNY Mellon, for example, they're using video content to do weekly roundups and supplement their images and articles that they publish every single day.
I'd say from my perspective, thinking about it from the distribution side, the biggest trend we're seeing is targeting, right? So marketers who've gotten accustomed to all of this targeting capability in the display advertising world, more and more the trend we're seeing is they're saying, okay, people aren't paying attention to display ads like they once were. We're getting into storytelling, we're getting into content marketing, and they're looking for more of that same kind of targeting. So as they've collected all of this information about their users, all of this data, they're looking to put that to work to tell better stories, not just to put better ads in front of people. And then the second big trend that we've seen is more of this episodic storytelling. So instead of trying to show the same story to every single user, think about how all of us consume content, like binge viewing on Netflix, right? We love that sequential storytelling. And that's never really existed in digital marketing. But more and more, we're seeing brands who are creating a sequence of stories and saying, the first time somebody interacts with my brand, show them this story. And then once they've read that, take that subset of people who are already familiar with my big story and show them something a little bit different the second time, the third time, and really working toward what, as marketers, we've been talking about since day one, which is how do you get to one-to-one conversational marketing and move away from kind of mass media, mass marketing, which was the only way we had to do things in a kind of print broadcast world. Obviously, given the web and given all the data and technology we have, we can do a lot better, and I think marketers are hungry to finally make that happen.
Okay. So, Alicia, I'm going to come back to you because you mentioned risk, and I know that that's an important topic to this audience here. Maybe you can talk about how you see brands trying to manage risk, or how you help brands manage risk in the context of creating content for different channels or trying to adapt to new channels that are constantly being created.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges for brands, particularly in this space, is the need to create a ton of content, do that at scale, but make sure that it's culturally and contextually relevant to different channels. And so the same piece of content that you put on LinkedIn is not going to work on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You have to be able to tailor your content to the different types of context that you're putting that in. But that's really hard for you guys in the audience, because when you have to have every single piece of content be approved by compliance and legal, it really decreases your speed to market and makes real-time content creation and becoming an always-on publisher very, very difficult. So a couple of things that we're seeing with our clients who are trying to mitigate risk and are trying to actually increase their speed to market. The first is they abandoned this idea of real-time content. They actually don't think about real-time content at all. They just think about a planned content calendar, and they do that at least a quarter or more in advance. A lot of our financial institutions, especially in healthcare and education, they'll develop an editorial calendar a quarter in advance. They have that approved by legal. They have very set workflows and approval processes, so it's very streamlined, and they know exactly who needs to sign off when. It's very much a machine and operational process. When it comes to channels, they're also investing in their owned properties. So they're not necessarily jumping to the next big or hot thing. They're really, really thinking about how do I invest in my owned properties, because at the end of the day, that's a conversion point between an engaged or even passive audience and a real prospect or customer. So thinking about how do I drive all those people from the different channels back to their own properties. The last thing about channels that I would love to share is we did a study looking at 100 different customers, 10,000 articles over the course of last year, and the #1 distribution channel was email. And so while there's always a new shiny thing out there, I think I would say don't forget what you've always invested in, the tried and true. Email is the #1 distribution channel that drives to greater page views and greater conversions.
So one quick follow-up question, and then I'll open it up to anyone else who wants to speak about the risk aspect in particular, and that is, as you work with so many brands at NewsCred, to what degree do you see compliance or any approver and marketing in the room at the same time when you're dealing with the whole content creation and planning model? I'm just curious about
And
that.
so a lot of the brands that we work with are very global in nature. So take Pfizer, they're in 24 different markets globally. And so they're often actually not in this room at the same time ever. In fact, they're across different time zones, different markets. And so everybody is actually on our software or a piece of software, and they're operationalizing that process, so at least there's a chain of command. And that gives people like the assurity and the confidence they know that the right piece of content is going to be signed off. In addition, a lot of these brands, they will use a brand checklist or a brand governance checklist that makes sure that that ideation process, there's specific steps that are always signed off on before an idea even becomes a reality or a piece of content. During the editorial process, those same checklists are then filtered through, and then before you publish, that again is hit on.
That's great. And
Yeah.
yes, please.
Just to add there, we've seen a lot of customers that are creating content at scale, developing these center of excellence, which really is pulling in folks from marketing, editorial, executive, as well as compliance and legal, and getting them all aligned with what the goals and the KPIs are for the institution, which means having legal on a platform that is approving content, getting them involved in the process earlier. So that way, as you kind of build out your benchmarks, it's very clear what the roles are and who's responsible for what.
Any other examples of some of the either risks that you run into or some of the best practices that you've seen that could be helpful here that anyone else wants to share?
I guess one other really small tip that I learned from Kraft is that for all of their social posts, they don't allow legal to actually edit or comment on any of those posts. They just send it to legal for a quick yes or no answer. And that just makes it so much easier to get content out there a lot faster and turn down content if needed to.
I'll just add one comment of my own, because Goldman really started to communicate more during a crisis moment, and also a moment in which social and digital platforms were really first starting to emerge for brands. And one of the things that really helped not be real time, but at least try to think ahead and adapt to all of the innovation going on, was to get the right control approval people in the room at the same time as the marketing people, create kind of this amazing working group that when it came to learning new channels or new products, we could gather together and learn them together. And then everyone was starting from the same point to try to figure out things, as opposed to have just the marketing team figure it out first, and then compliance or legal gets called in at the last minute to not only approve something that suddenly becomes urgent, but also to have to learn a completely new way of potentially positioning or distributing something. So, that's just something that I've seen work very, very well when it can function. Are there any channels in particular that seem to reduce speed or require particular approvals or just be challenging for content creators that you've seen? Sure.
Yeah, I think on just video production. So our company's 5 years old, and we started as a network of journalists, and it's evolved a lot over the last few years, and we're seeing, the traditional editorial written content evolve into more multimedia, right? Infographics, videos, short form videos. And you mentioned earlier the concept of real-time content marketing. That's going to continue to apply. And a lot of brands want to get involved in the conversation. They want to do it not just with an article, but with a short form video, something that's going to be visual and impactful. And I think if you're a financial institution, insurance company, technology business or healthcare, there's a lot of things that go into that. And I think that's one area where utilizing technology, utilizing a software, utilizing approval flows and workflows enable you to go and to respond rapidly to what's happening in the marketplace.
All right, Tom, I'm going to direct this question at you and then Matt. How do you typically measure ROI on content, and how do you use content in different channels?
Sure.
Do you have an example? Or?
Yeah. I guess I'll start with the content in different channels first. And the really important part there is to understand who you're creating the content for and where are these people hanging out first. So it's really developing the persona and saying that I know this group of my customers are using LinkedIn. And I know that the influencer persona, they aren't. They're searching Facebook. they're on forums, they're doing other things. So understanding the personas, understanding the channels that they hang out on first is really critical. And then measuring the content, we use the platform HubSpot, which is marketing automation software, which basically gives us the ability to track when that person first visits any piece of our content and track them all the way through the sales process to close, to say that this tweet or this blog post or this whatever actually created a customer. So that's how we generate the return on that investment and show that to our customers.
Yeah, and I'd say the ROI question is the one we get more than any other, right? It's, content marketing. I think brands like doing it. I think there are challenges. There are great tools to doing this, but they see people interacting with their content, and there's a so what factor, right? And, at Outbrain, we drive a lot of traffic to owned and operated experiences, to earned media. As far as going beyond just the click, different brands have different KPIs, right? And so a lot of brands, when they're just starting out with content marketing, just look at the clicks. It's not really an ROI number, but as they get more sophisticated, tie it to return on ad spend. I mentioned a little bit about targeting. We offer kind of custom audiences and ways of targeting and retargeting and using marketer data to really get down to not just reaching the right people, but looking at those outcomes that those users are driving. So, one example, working with Red Bull, who does a fantastic job with content marketing, they ran their own internal brand analyses and found that brand lift was tied to users coming back to the site more frequently. So now they're working with us to retarget users who have been to redbull.com because they've seen in their own internal metrics, those are the most valuable users, driving the kinds of brand feelings, brand consideration that they really care about.
So just as a follow-on question, particularly on the distribution side, from a brand safety and compliance standpoint, how do you give brands a sense of comfort about control as to where they are showing up?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So it's not just sending stories out into the ether, but brands really, like you said, having some control over that. With us at Outbrain, it starts at the highest level with the publishers we work with, right? So we have fixed permanent relationships, placements, I should say, on those publishers' pages, whether those are desktop, mobile app. And so knowing that you're going to appear as a brand on, Time Inc., on ESPN, on a Rodale property, et cetera, it starts there. But we also allow marketers to block certain publishers that they don't want to appear on. And there may be a variety of reasons that marketers have to say, I want to appear on publisher A, but not publisher B. And we give them the flexibility to do that. One of the things, a compliance question on the publisher side for us, we don't allow marketers to say, I only want to run on CNN, right? Because CNN has a direct ad sales team that is out there creating relationships with marketers, selling their site specifically. We don't want to compete with the publisher's own sales team. So we do give brands the comfort, the tools, the ability to filter where they appear without specifically saying, I only want to appear on this one publisher.
Well, just speaking from my own experience back at Goldman, I remember one of the first challenges when we were first working with Outbrain was we had so many constraints and sources of anxiety as to where our content would appear that the Outbrain team came back to us and said, you haven't given us enough ways to get your content out there. We constrained it so much. And so it's interesting to think about all of these constraints that sometimes marketers and brands will bring to the table in an effort to be super cautious. I mean, after the panel before us, it's no surprise that people feel that way. So I'm curious as to some examples of having to be creative in working through constraints with brands that are in regulated situations or are just nervous because it may be their first time in a channel or it may be their first time working with certain kinds of content. So Elysian, any examples?
Yeah, so I'll give one example is the Hartford Insurance Company. They've been a client with NewsCred for a few years, and in their first year, they went from creating 12 pieces of content a year to 494 pieces of content that ultimately drove over 4 million page views in that year. And so a couple of things that we learned from working from this journey. The first was that they used to think of a channel strategy, and then how do I fill those channels with content? And they did a total transformation where they started to think about their content strategy first, creating a culture of content, making content a habit, and then thinking about how they're going to drive that content out. The second thing is that they started to think about the buyer's journey as nothing more than a series of questions waiting to be answered. So at the very top of the funnel, what are your customers asking before they even heard about Hartford Insurance? As they start looking for solutions, what are they asking? As they're starting to compare different offerings, what are they asking? They mapped out all these questions across the customer journey, and they started answering those questions. And they were able to do that very thoughtfully, and then therefore make sure that these compliance and regulatory challenges were addressed in each of those in advance as they were mapping those out over the course of each quarter, over the course of the year. And then I would say that the last thing that they learned is that it's all about consistency. So for them, they published 1 to 2 articles every single day for the course of a year. That volume didn't necessarily increase, month over month. It was just consistent. And that kind of consistency ultimately drove a lot more page views. At the end of the year, it's 4 million page views, because that same article that was published, say, January of that year, was still driving traffic because of SEO 12 months later. So it was all about consistency at the end of the day.
Any other examples?
Yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head on that one. I'd love to support it by just saying that you guys already have a lot of content, so a great way to get around maybe someone who's a little bit nervous about it is to repurpose. So it might be offline, it might be in other areas that aren't on your website currently, but it's already been approved maybe by a few teams in your office that you can then leverage again as different forms of that content. And also try things that are much quicker to put together. So when you think about long form content, maybe you're writing a 2,000-page ebook, that might not be the best first venture into creating content or on scale. So maybe try considering some short blog posts in a series of storytelling like you're talking about. Maybe it's a Facebook live video. I mean, that's probably a little aggressive, but maybe it's something that is a webinar, something that can be easily put together from slides from a previous pitch deck that you have. So repurpose that content, leverage it in other ways, and hopefully get past that barrier of being fearful that it may not be the best content.
Sure.
Yeah, and I agree with both those sentiments there. One thing that we've seen over time is, how do you create content at scale? And to produce 400 stories, that's a lot of work. A lot of our customers that we see tap into our freelance community, these subject matter experts, for ideation, for ideas on, hey, how do we talk about the credit markets in Southeast Asia? These are very specific requests. And if you're a brand, running a marketing team, editorial team, you might not necessarily have all of those stories ready to go. And that's one aspect as you really start to mature your content marketing processes, is figuring out how do you tap into influencers and how do you tap into subject matter experts globally that can help you tell that story.
That's great. I guess I'm going to ask one other question and then hopefully hear from all of you. And then, maybe we can open things up for a question or two, if that's all right. I'll be sure to watch the clock. This relates to the one thing, if you were forced to name it, that's coming on the horizon that this audience should really brace for, and then embrace. And I think some of that relates to some of these live platforms that, for anyone who needs an approval process is super scary. But I'm curious as to each of your perspectives on that. Maybe we'll go backwards this time, if you don't mind, Matt.
Yeah, I'll start sort of trying to look over the horizon. One of the things we're spending a lot of time on right now is messaging apps, right? So I think a lot of us probably saw at the Facebook F8 conference, Mark Zuckerberg opened it up talking about Facebook Messenger becoming an entire service platform. And you hear these things and you think, well, it's just a messaging app for me to message my friends, right? But there was a time in which email was just a way to get in touch with people you knew directly, right? So looking at the amount of time that consumers are spending in messaging apps, and that's becoming more and more the starting point for how they interact with their mobile devices, especially when you get push notifications from a messaging app. if you think about it, that first point of contact is an extremely important place for brands to think about, where do they fit in and where do their stories fit in. Obviously, hitting users with ads right away is not the way to do it, and I think all of us on this stage would agree with that. But how do you weave brand storytelling into those moments? We actually powered the app that Mark Zuckerberg was showing that CNN provides. I say app, it's the Messenger app, but it's really the chatbot, the CNN chatbot that powers that. I would say, for this group, spend a lot of time looking at what messaging apps are doing. That's where users are spending their time. That world's going to change a lot in the next 6 months. And I think a lot of really interesting opportunities are going to come out of that.
Great. Okay.
So I think one thing I'm really excited about is content beyond marketing, and specifically content for sales. So many of you guys in the room have distributed or large sales teams out there, and thinking about how can you transform each salesperson into a trusted advisor or into a thought leader. And doing that means, they're not going to be constantly just cold calling, sending emails, sharing product marketing content or case studies. They're actually going to be a trusted advisor and using content and storytelling to help guide that purchase decision and guide their relationship over the course of time with their customers. And so really thinking about content for sales enablement.
I love it. I'm going to echo kind of what Matt was talking about in this bot and this AI platform. I think automation is probably the next big stage of content, and actually it being done by computers versus people, and computers being smart enough to aggregate content. I mean, I don't think we're there yet, but I have seen a few talks, one of them recently at the HubSpot headquarters for a partner event. The CEO, Brian Halligan, was talking about how things like Siri and Amazon's I forget her name, but how they're becoming smarter and smarter. Every second they're listening to you. And eventually they're going to be able to repeat things back to you and send you exactly the things that you want, which might actually be pieces of content that they create themselves. And I also spoke with the CTO, Dharmesh Shah of HubSpot as well, who demonstrated one of his Slack bots in his platform, which could actually communicate with other web publishing platforms by just typing in a command. So for example, you can go into Slack, and it would connect to HubSpot and say, I want to post a blog to Medium. It would reach out to HubSpot, start the blog post, reach out to Medium, say, hey, I also started your blog post. I also added your title. It's ready to go. So these things are all being automated. It's happening now, but I think it's going to enter the market probably within the next year or so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the brand blog is table stakes now. And I think content marketing will evolve beyond editorial and visual and really become a total sensory experience. Short-term innovation is real-time video production. Doesn't take 3 weeks, 3 months to create a video. It should be able to be done in 24 to 48 hours. So we're seeing a lot of those trends occur.
I have one more question, and then hopefully someone or one or two people have questions here. And that is just about the topic of native advertising. Clearly something that's been in the crosshairs of regulators, justifiably, something that everyone seems to define a little bit differently. Maybe one or two of you wants to talk about how you've seen brands define that and deal with it, particularly in regulated industries where there are some challenges. Any volunteers?
JP Morgan Chase has done an interesting job experimenting with BuzzFeed. And so I was recently talking to them last week, and they were saying, it really took a lot of courage for us to test out our brand on this platform that you wouldn't necessarily think would line up together. But they did it, and they actually saw a lot of success with it. I think what was really interesting was that it took a lot of courage to be on a different platform like BuzzFeed and take something that might be necessarily a boring topic and transform it into something more inspiring, a little bit more entertaining, appropriate for a different audience. At the end of the day, they weren't necessarily able to connect the piece of native advertising content to actual sales, but they were able to connect it to share of voice and brand lift.
Any other, even a definition as to what you're seeing native advertising to be?
I mean, just to add, I think, it's all about the content. If it's a good article, if it's a powerful story, then it's going to be in a productive format. I think a lot of times people want to insert themselves in the conversation without having a really clear, distinct point of view. The New York Times Studio does a pretty good job at this. But again, it's always about the quality of the editorial that goes into that investment.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that anyone in the industries that are represented here would be very comfortable having their content labeled very clearly as sponsored or whatever the word of the day is. But I think sometimes it becomes an area of regulatory focus because people try to slide in and not label appropriately. But I don't think that's an issue here. How about a question? Anyone about a risk or anything that you want to ask this amazing panel? I just want to make sure that we're aligned with the things that are keeping you up at night. Anything? I guess different things are keeping you up at night. Okay. Anything else that you guys want to add? That you wish people knew or that you've seen that's been, a no-brainer, must do? I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Well, good luck to everyone. Thank you all so much.
Great.